Hello, I am writing to you in order to tell you my account of events most suspicious. I hereby declare that everything in this letter is a factual account of my experience over the past week regarding case number 1238 in Shelby Falls. If you have any questions regarding the case, please contact Dwayne Kanye at Shelby Falls Central Police Station. Though truth be told, you aren't going to get any better information than this. It all started a week ago. At first, it was like any other Monday morning. I awoke at 6 a.m., dressed up in my uniform, and headed downstairs for a quick cup of coffee and a few biscuits. While sitting at the table, I performed my own usual, personal little morning ritual, studying my officer badge intently and repeating my name mentally as I read it over and over again. It was a habit I picked up when I first joined the force in order to calm my nerves before the day began. Officer Albert Rogers. I almost said aloud. Seeing my name on the badge made me feel proud. I'm one of the few people who can say that they actually grew into the person they wanted to be as a child. Once my coffee and biscuits were extinguished, I made a trip to my mailbox to see if anything had come in from the weekend. I'm naturally a disciplined person, but I must admit that I often forget to check my mail regularly. Honestly, knowing what I know now, I wish that I had completely forgotten that I have a mailbox at all. Inside the mailbox was the usual assortment of spam and advertisements. Great. Maybe this is why checking the mail is such a hard habit to form. It rarely pays off. Initially, I was just going to donate all of it to the recycling bin, but there was one letter that stood out. It was a plain letter addressed to me, but oddly there was no return address. It had an old-timey wax seal that was pitch black in color, and had a mansion depicted on it. For a few moments, I was actually a bit excited. Was I about to be informed of the death of a long-lost relative whose fortune I was to inherit? A few seconds later, and my excitement turned to private shame. What a foolish thought. Life couldn't be that stereotypical, could it? But still, I found the mystery too tempting. That is the problem with detectives. Give us even a hint of a mystery and we're hooked. A character flaw, really, but a profitable one with the right resources. Grabbing a pocket knife out of my jacket, I carefully peeled the seal of the envelope. Seemed like a shame to break it. Inside was a standard A4 paper folded twice to fit in the envelope. The contents of the paper appeared to be a shoddy advertisement for a housing development project called Shelby's Retreat. Another one of those all-too-common garden home suburban projects. The ad had an amateurish picture of a happy family in front of a home. It honestly looked like it had been clipped out of a magazine. The letter read, in sloppy, weak handwriting, "We welcome you to Shelby's Retreat. We offer brand new, affordable quality homes that are perfect for first-time buyers, or those looking to make their pension go further. Act quickly. Houses are selling fast and you won't want to miss this opportunity." Below this was a date and time written for an open house. Today at 1 p.m. 1366 Waverly Drive was the address for the showing. I didn't see an agent to contact about this viewing, but at the bottom of the page, Shelby Real Estate Co. was watermarked. The whole note had me intrigued. Why go through the trouble of adding a wax seal and making the letter look fancy when the contents were so unprofessional? Perhaps I was overthinking it. Anyone can buy wax and get a little stamp these days. The note was amateur quality through and through then, though the unconventional nature of it did make me want to open it, so perhaps it was a very effective marketing after all. I chucked a little thinking of some poor intern at Shelby Real Estate's offices having to play 4D chess with this advertising campaign. I discarded the note in an envelope with the rest of the trash, and proceeded to have a completely uneventful commune to my station. Once at my desk, I began looking through the reports of the day. Several immediately caught my eye. People had been reporting receiving creepy unwanted mail in their mailbox. One report included a picture, and I had begun to suspect The envelope they received had the same black wax seal on it. The contents of their letter was different from mine. Seemed like the letter was trying to invite them to a birthday party. It had the same crappy graphics that were clearly pasted from a magazine. There was also a date and time which was legible. But I was able to barely make out the address. 1366 Waverly Street. Other detectives in the force probably wrote these reports off as some prank by kids. But my gut told me that there was something more sinister to this. I booted up my computer and typed in 1366 Waverly Drive and Shelby's Retreat. No hits for any articles on Shelby's Retreat, but it seems that the neighborhood did exist on Google Maps. I called Shelby Real Estate and inquired about the open house. A sweet voice on the other end of the line told me that they had no recollection of an open house for that address. If Shelby's Retreat did exist, it was not in their files. This was beginning to look suspicious enough to investigate further. I entered the new case file into our system for the letter I received, case 1238, and began driving towards the suburb to do an initial investigation. The sky was completely dreary when I left. What started out as a sunny October morning became a gray, cloudy mess with an annoying drizzle of cold rain. The kind of drizzle that made you turn on your windshield wipers for one swipe before waiting 3 or so minutes for it to accumulate enough to justify another. Once I had gotten to the periphery of the suburb, I slowed my vehicle down to a leisurely crawl so I could absorb the details of my surroundings. From the outside, the suburbs looked mostly complete and built. However, there was no sign at the entrance giving a name for the neighborhood. Who knew if this was even Shelby's Retreat? Well, if Shelby's Retreat even existed, of course. Driving into the main arterial road for the suburb, I noticed that most of the houses had well-kept lawns, and their exteriors looked freshly built. But there was no sign of inhabitants for any of the dwellings. No cars in the driveways, no lights on in the house. For such a gray day, they should have been visible from the outside, I thought. I began driving down the minor streets to check more houses, but it was all very much the same. New houses, no inhabitants. Perhaps the letter was correct. These houses were so newly built that no one had even moved in yet. Going to the 1366's open house might provide more answers, I thought. It was on Waverly Drive that I saw the one and only sign of life in the neighborhood. In the driveway of 1364 Waverly Drive, the neighbor of 1366, was a beaten-up looking car. There were still no lights in the house, however. Whoever lived there must have had 2 cars and took one out for some chores, I thought. Then I noticed a peculiar string of yarn hanging out of 1364's mailbox. It was tethered to the inside of the mailbox, and it went all the way to the front door of 1364. I couldn't help but think, God bless America. Here was someone so lazy that they devised a system to get their mail without ever leaving the comfort of their home. Perhaps I could use such a system to check my own mail. Would make it less of a hassle. Funny thinking with that one pull of a rope I could dump all of those ads while drinking my morning coffee. Turning my attention back to 1366, I noticed that there was a distinct lack of guests or even a real estate agent waiting outside of the house. As I began to approach the main entrance of the house, I experienced the all too familiar tingling of adrenaline. Something about this seemed so off. A neighborhood with only one inhabitant, an open house with closed doors and no welcome party. It did not feel right. What if this was an elaborate setup for a mugging? The more I looked at the facade of 1366, the more hesitant I became. My mind started playing silly tricks on me in order to get me to turn heel. It tried to convince me that the 2 front-facing windows, dark from the lack of lighting, were actually windows into the abyss, or the cold, dead eyes of a predator that feels no remorse as it sinks its teeth into its prey. The wind was starting to pick up now, and, combined with the freezing rain, I had to make a decision. This was supposed to be an open house, or a birthday party after all, so there should be no harm taking a peek inside, and I should be safe. I had a gun with me after all. If this whole suburb was some den for crackheads or thieves, at least I had some protection. As I began walking towards the front door, I saw some movement from the corner of my eye, but it was not coming from 1366. I looked to the left and studied a window from the side of 1364. There was an elderly man with his face pressed into the window glass. When I moved my hand to the doorknob of 1366, I saw his hands move to the front of his face. At first I thought he was about to shout something, but it seems that he was praying. Though it was hard to tell from a distance, I could have sworn that a uniform trickle of tears were rolling down his face. Was my mind just playing tricks on me once again? I yelled out to him that I was an officer and asked if he needed assistance. He looked wide-eyed at me and ducked below the window. I walked up to the window, but it was too high for me to peek down into his house. I knocked a few times asking if the old man needed my help, but I received only silence. I continued to listen. Silence. Silence. The wind blowing between the houses, raindrops hitting the vinyl sidings of the house. Silence. After about a minute I turned around to return to 1366, but as I did so I heard weeping prayers to Jesus and Mother Mary coming from the window behind me. Christ, that's sad, I thought to myself. The man must have had dementia or some other illness and was probably abandoned by his caretakers for the day. I breathed deeply and returned to the door of 1366. Exhaling, I opened the door and took my first step inside. The inside of the house looked impossible. It was much larger than the outside would imply, and the interior decoration looked ancient, like an old mansion you'd see in fairy tales or on Disney rides. It was almost completely dark save for a few candles that lined a grand stairway in front of me. At the top of the staircase was some kind of altar flanking by smaller staircases that led to the second floor of the house. A house that was clearly only a single floor from the outside. I thought it might have been the darkness playing a trick on me, but this was far too elaborate to explain away with the mere movement of shadows being processed by an anxiety-laden mind. I did not go back. I could not go back. There was something compelling me to look at the altar on the stair landing. Step by step, I walked up until the altar's contents came into view. It was another letter with an identical envelope to the one I and so many others had received. I did not take time to carefully open this one. I hastily ripped its contents out. Unfolding the paper, I saw a message in rather fancy cursive writing. In this house full of dread, not many are willing to tread, but you have entered instead, giving me my daily bread. All this for some high school poetry? I shrieked out in anger. My voice bounced off the far walls and ceiling of the foyer. I threw the paper on the ground in frustration and stood there breathing heavily. Once the echoes of my anger had subsided, the only sound to be heard was the whispering of the wind and the plip-plopping of rain outside. The rain seemed to get louder, and louder, and louder still until it was no longer rain. It was the sound of heavy boot steps coming from the stairs behind me. I could not make out much in the darkness, but each step was getting louder and louder, like a body being slammed to ground with each step to some unseen being's gate. I pulled out my gun and pointed it into the darkness. "I'm Officer Rogers, a member of the Shelby Police. Lay down on the ground and identify yourself." There was no noticeable change in the rhythm of footsteps. They continued until suddenly I saw it. 2 feet wearing a familiar set of shoes entered the dim candlelight of the staircase. As they slowly shuffled down the staircase, their torso was revealed, and in 2 more steps, I saw its grotesque face. Only, it was my face, and my body. Except my eyes were not my eyes. They had been replaced by 2 of the black, waxy seals as seen on the envelopes. They were halfway melting, and the resulting black drip, giving the beast a weepy appearance. It raised its hand, and from its index finger grew a long, curved blade. It was probably half a meter in length, its steel glowing a pale orange from the candlelight and casting a long, serpent-like shadow on the wall. The sight of my armed doppelganger was too much, and I fired 2 shots without hesitation. Both went through the chest, but the monster did not react. It kept its slow pace and continued plodding towards me. I breathed in deep and honed my sights for the creature's eyes, those damned eyes that made a mockery of my visage. With 1 shot, I popped off the seal from the left eye of my worse half. Instead of staring into a bullet wound from where I shot the creature, I found a glowing red eye staring back at me. The unblinking red eye that pulsed like the embers of dying fire had me so completely entranced that I did not notice that this crazed version of me was within arm's reach. It was too late. I looked down at the creature's silver-orange blade was sunk deep into my belly. I saw my blood trickle out from my sweater and jacket. It seemed to follow its own path rather than the one dedicated by gravity, running down the blade and then up the arm and body of the creature until it flowed into that red eye. Then it simply retracted its blade and disappeared. I looked down at my stomach and the wound was gone. I felt weak, but I could still stand. Looking at the altar, I noticed a new letter sitting upon it, tempting me to give it another read. Screw this. I ran to the front door and yanked it open. The outside all looked the same, except that the car in front of 1364 was now gone. I guess the old man was capable of leaving by himself after all. Using the remains of my might, I dashed to my own vehicle. However, the further away I got from the house, the greater a pressure I felt in my chest. It became harder and harder to breathe as I approached the handle of my car. Nonetheless, I made it inside. Looking into the rearview mirror, I made a sick discovery. My skin looked parched and my hair was graying. It was as if I had aged 10 years. Perhaps that's also why I felt weaker. I fished the keys out of my pocket. I was about to stick them in the ignition when suddenly I had a premonition of the car blowing up as soon as the metal connected. My heart starting palpitating harder. I would need to run instead, but outside the car stood 2 ravens in the street. If I tried to run, they are going to dive into my eyes, I thought. I knew, chest pounding more frequently now, I could see it clearly. Those birds would fly into the sky and then dive bomb directly into my eye sockets. I hear a crash coming from the rear window of the car. Chest was practically collapsing now. A hooded man with a trench coat, jacket, broke through the window and is connecting hundreds of pipes to the car exhaust. I will suffocate in this car. I looked at my badge. It has always been my savior, my soothing ritual. Albert Rogers, officer. I repeat over and over, but the heaviness I feel in my chest is no longer bearable. My only hope is the house. It just has to be. I quickly discard the badge and explode out the car and towards the house, ripping the doors open and slamming them shut behind me. My chest eases. I can breathe again. I look out the window. There is no sign of my earlier assailants. Taking a few moments to breathe and let it all sink in, I realize that there is nothing more for me to do than read the expecting letter. Thump, thump, thump. I drag my feet up the stairs, mimicking the menacing mimic who had assaulted me minutes earlier. I put a heavy hand on the altar end. With the other, picked up the envelope. This time I opened it with diligent care. Inside I found a set of rules and directives. Come to me, sweet lamb. Feed me and sustain me. You are one of my prisoners. In a jail with but one escape, bring me another to the dreary home of 1368. So, here I am a week later. I am but a shadow of my former self. Every night at midnight, my red-eyed doppelganger takes another piece of me. I grow older. My body and heart grow more frail. I've tried hiding, but it always finds me. I've tried going outside, but I am only strong enough to get to the mailbox before the hallucinations begin and I start wheezing. I wish I took that rope from 1364. It would have given me a great assistance in getting to and from the mailbox. But I believe I have figured out how this curse operates. In order to free myself, I just need to invite another to the neighboring house. Have this evil spirit, beast, or whatever take them instead of me. That's how the being gets fresh food. I once asked what would happen if I simply choose to rot away, and the being responded that they know how to ration. I could live my whole lifetime in this agony. I have tried to end myself, but every time I try to do so, I get these strong feelings of hope, praying that one day a stray car will pass by and maybe, just maybe, someone will wander into the house at 1368 and pick up that letter. I have now resigned myself to send letters, much like the one I am writing now, to curious individuals. I'm not like the host of 1364. I do not want to trick you. I am writing my full account so that you know what you are in for. So come on, all you paranormal investigators, puzzle solvers, and wannabe witchers. Won't you be my neighbor?